This is the background service application in JavaScript. Of the 4 languages, this is probably the most difficult one, simply because of the nature of the way Node runs on the server and the way we have to do things in JavaScript to have things done in an infinite loop. Threading is not exactly easy to do in JavaScript, but there are ways of getting around that. I've got the project open here, and the first thing we need to do is run an npm install. So I'll open up the terminal, and you can just run npm I as well. You don't have to type install. We'll give this a moment. It'll install the packages for us. Alrighty, now that we've got that, we can run our test, which is just npm test. Give this just a moment. There's our run. We do get a failure, which is exactly what I'd expect. So let's go ahead and head into the test. Let's see what's happening here. Let's talk about what we're doing. We've got some helper functions, but let's look at the test itself. We are using a working directory path of, on the C drive, we've got a temp folder in that white belt folder, in that exercise, background, application, and then JavaScript. So several nested folders. We're going to end up using these 2 files, test input and test output. Then the test is deleting both of those files if they already exist. That way we start from scratch, we start from a clean slate as the test runs. That way if the test ran before, we don't have old files still there messing up our test. Then we write the input file, so testing exclamation point. Our actual code, we're going to create a mirror job class, giving it the input path, the output path, and this 500. This 500 is going to be our interval in milliseconds, so it's going to run every half second. We're going to execute the job, and then we're going to stop the job. So we're going to start it and immediately stop it. We'll read the file contents, and then we'll make sure that the contents are the reverse of testing with an exclamation point. So the read file contents is failing right now because there is no file, because execute isn't doing anything. So let's go ahead and head into that function. So here we have our mirror job class. Now we're using the function keyword instead of the class keyword. So different syntax that we're using here, but it's still just a class. Mirror job is a class, and its constructor takes an input path, an output path, and interval in milliseconds. So what we need to do here, this one's going to be a little more interesting than, again, the other 3 languages. We need to create a loop. And in order to create a loop that'll run effectively asynchronously in JavaScript, because we can't spin up another thread, we're going to set a timeout and call a function recursively. So this is going to be very interesting. So executing, we basically need to know if we're running or not. So I'll start off by saying is running equals true. And then on the stop, is running equals false. And let's create our is running variable. So we'll default it to false. When we start, we'll say true. When we stop, we'll say false. The other thing we need to do is create our function that actually processes the file, copies it, reverses it, and spits it back out. But this is going to be our recursive function. So let's say process files. And we need to give it some values. So we're going to say process files with the input path, the output path, and then our interval in milliseconds. So we're going to need to create this function here. So let's create const process files equals a function taking input, output, and interval. So I'm just using the same terms, but shorthand, shortening these down since this is effectively a private function. So in here, the first thing we need to do is say if we're not running, then just return. Stop processing. That basically means somebody said stop, and then we need to exit out of the application. And this is what the test is going to do. It's going to tell it to stop. That'll immediately see this and then exit back out of the application. Now let's go ahead and do the recursive side of this as well. So on the recursive side, what we're going to want to do is basically pass in, we're going to call ourselves, but we'll do this in a timeout. So we'll call set timeout. And this needs a function that we're going to call, which is going to be ourself. And we're going to give it the same values, input, output, and interval. But if interval is empty, let's default it to our 5 seconds. So there's our 5-second rule that we had inside the README file. Finally, what goes inside the inside here that goes between these lines is going to be our actual code. So all of this was just to set up a loop in JavaScript. Again, this is the trickiest of the 4 languages because of the nature of JavaScript and how things work with multi-threading. In here, all we need to do is read the file contents, reverse them, and then write them back out. That's basically it. So to do that, we're going to import, and since we're using module or a common JS instead of module syntax, we're going to use the require. So we're going to say const fx equals require, and we're pulling in the fs library. Fs is short for file system. We're going to use that to say read file, and I'm going to do this synchronously. So it's going to read our input, and I'm going to tell it it's UTF-8 so we know it is a string. So const file contents equals, so there we've read. Now we need to reverse. So we'll do this as, so we'll say file contents dot split dot reverse dot join. So there's our one-liner in JavaScript to reverse a string. And then finally we'll write this back out. So write file sync And let's see if there is, yes, append file sync. That's going to be more like what we want. So we'll say append file. That way it'll create the file if it doesn't exist, or add to it if it does already exist. So we'll say output path, and then the data is the reversed file contents. And that basically sets everything up. This looks right. Let's go ahead and head back and rerun our tests, see if I've got any problems. No, okay, we passed. So this is the code to create the loop and then run through. So the other thing we need to do, now that we've got the test working, is actually make the application work itself. The entry point in Node is going to be our index.js by default. If it's not that, you can confirm that in the package.json. You'll see this main says this is the main entry point. So in our case, it is index.js. So I'll open up the index.js file. So this is going to do everything inside this directory. That's a really long directory. I'm going to shorten this to just ctemp. It's going to create an input txt and an output txt and run it. Notice we're not passing the interval, and so it's going to default to that 5,000 milliseconds or 5 seconds. So let me go to the temp, and let's create a file. So this is our input.txt, and this will be Chad's awesome test. So there's our input file. Let's go back, and we're going to run our application. So we'll do this with node index. Oh, we have a problem. Oh, I need to save the changes to index. That's what needs to happen. Let's try that again. There we go. It is running. So let's head back over. Sure enough, output is there. Oh, it is going like crazy. I think I may have had a problem. Let me stop this. We'll clear that. Let me go back to our mirror job. Process files. Oh, I didn't set the actual timeout. My apologies. We want to pass input file, output file, and interval. And then we need the actual delay will be the interval for 5,000. I put that in the wrong place. So the set timeout takes 2 arguments. One is the callback function, which is the recursive function. The other is the timeout. This is where we need the or 5,000. Let me rerun the test first. Perfect, that passes. Let's rerun the application. All right, we are running. There we go, we have our file. Okay, it has run. We'll give it just a few seconds. There it is again. Let's give it a few more seconds. And there it is again. So we have everything working. Control-C to stop the application in the terminal. That is everything. So let's review what we did. Going back to the mirror job. So quite a bit going on here. We have an is running to let us know if the application is running or not. In execute, we start by setting is running to true, and then we call process files. Process files does a check on running, and if it is not running, it stops. Otherwise, it does what we need it to do with reading the file, reversing, and writing, and then recursively calls itself with set timeout for our interval or 5,000 milliseconds. And this will, again, process in 5 seconds. It'll process files again. So that's our recursive part. Finally, if we call stop, it'll say is running is false, and that stops everything. The last thing that we did on index, the only thing I really changed here was the directory path, and that was everything. We got it to work.